There are some crimes that dig deep into the darkest corners of human imagination. The Zodiac Killer is one such specter, a name that sends chills down spines decades after the reign of terror began. In this story, we unravel the case of one of America's most enigmatic serial killers, whose true identity still remains a mystery. But beware, the answers may be more disturbing than you can imagine. On a cold December night in 1968, the quiet peace of Vallejo, California, was shattered. At a secluded lover's lane, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, both just teenagers, were enjoying an innocent night together when the unthinkable happened. Their lives were taken in a senseless act of violence. The couple was found brutally shot, and while investigators initially treated this as an isolated tragedy, it would soon become apparent that this was just the beginning. Betty Lou was just 16 years old, full of life, with dreams and ambitions that would never come to fruition. Her family described her as kind-hearted and full of promise. David, only 17, was an eager young man, protective of Betty, and ready to face the future by her side. Their story, like so many others, was abruptly cut short by an evil that no one could have predicted. The crime scene was a puzzle to the investigators. There were no signs of robbery or sexual assault, no clear motive. The randomness of the attack left authorities baffled, and for the families of Betty and David, there was no comfort, only questions. Why had this happened? Who could do such a thing? These were answers that seemed impossible to find. But the nightmare was far from over. This was not an isolated incident, as many had hoped. This was the beginning of a spree of terror that would leave the entire region gripped in fear. Months passed, and then came the letters. In July 1969, 3 major newspapers in California, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, received disturbing messages. The writer claimed responsibility for the murders of Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, as well as another double homicide that had occurred just days earlier. But this wasn't just any letter. It was signed with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, and accompanied by a cryptogram that the killer dared the public to solve. The cryptograms were complex and chilling in their simplicity. The Zodiac knew that his ciphers would captivate the public's imagination, but more importantly, they would give him a voice. He wasn't just a killer. He was an orchestrator of fear, and the letters were his stage. The ciphers themselves seemed uncrackable, and for weeks they remained unsolved, frustrating both the authorities and the public. The killer's words danced just beyond comprehension, adding an air of mystery to the already terrifying crimes. The Zodiac wasn't just interested in killing, he wanted the world to know him. He reveled in the chaos he was causing. Each letter contained more than just threats. There was an arrogance to them, a confidence that seemed to mock those trying to catch him. He was playing a game, a deadly game, with the entire state of California, and he was winning. The cryptogram was eventually cracked by a schoolteacher and his wife. The decoded message was as chilling as the murders themselves. "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all." This was a killer who was not driven by the usual motives of revenge, anger, or lust. No, this was someone who found joy in the act of murder itself. And this revelation only deepened the fear that had already taken hold of the region. The Zodiac wasn't just killing, he was hunting. But who was he hunting? Why these victims? The randomness of the attacks added a level of terror that was almost impossible to comprehend. There was no pattern to the victims, no clear connection. This was violence for the sake of violence, and it left everyone feeling vulnerable. By September 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time at Lake Berryessa. The peaceful, picturesque lakeside soon became the scene of another horrific crime. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying an afternoon by the water when they were approached by a man dressed in an eerie, hooded costume. The figure's chilling presence was only amplified by the strange symbol on his chest, the Zodiac's signature mark. He bound the couple, stabbed them, and left them for dead. Miraculously, Brian survived the attack, and his account would provide the first real description of the killer. The image of the Zodiac killer, his dark hood, his unsettling demeanor, etched itself into the minds of the public. But even with this new information, the killer remained elusive. Brian's survival offered hope, a chance to finally catch the monster behind the mask, but it wasn't enough. The Zodiac seemed to vanish as quickly as he had appeared, slipping through the fingers of law enforcement time and time again. Not long after, the Zodiac made a phone call to the police, casually confessing to the crime at Lake Berryessa. His voice was calm, his words measured, as if he had just completed a mundane task. The fear gripping the public only grew. Who was this man? Why couldn't he be caught? The Zodiac seemed to enjoy toying with law enforcement, playing a cat-and-mouse game that left investigators frustrated and the public terrified. And as more letters came, so too did more cryptic clues. One of his letters read, "This is the Zodiac speaking." He demanded that his messages be printed on the front page of the papers, threatening to kill again if his wishes weren't met. With every letter, the Zodiac gave more puzzles to solve, more mysteries to decode. But even the brightest minds in cryptography struggled to crack the codes. It was as if the answers were right in front of them, yet just out of reach. The terror wasn't over. On October 11, 1969, the Zodiac struck again. This time, a San Francisco cab driver named Paul Stein was shot and killed in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. The killer took a piece of Stein's bloody shirt and later sent it to the Chronicle, once again mocking the authorities. The arrogance, the audacity. It was as if the Zodiac believed he was invincible, always one step ahead of the law. Despite eyewitnesses to the crime and a detailed sketch of the suspect, the Zodiac evaded capture yet again. Every lead seemed to lead to a dead end. Every promising clue dissolved into frustration. Investigators were grasping at straws, and the public began to wonder if this shadowy figure would ever be caught. As the 1970s progressed, the Zodiac continued to haunt California. His letters grew more bizarre, more cryptic, as if he was losing interest in the killing itself and becoming more obsessed with the cat-and-mouse game he had created. His final known letter in 1974, ending with the cryptic sign-off, Me, CAC 37, SFPD, 0, was a chilling reminder of the killer's belief that he had outsmarted everyone. But even as the letters stopped, the fear didn't. For years, the case remained active, with detectives chasing down every possible lead. Theories about the Zodiac's identity have been put forward, some more plausible than others. Many believe that the Zodiac was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who seemed to fit the profile. However, no definitive evidence has ever been found to tie him to the killings. The lack of forensic evidence, combined with the Zodiac's ability to disappear without a trace, has left investigators grasping for answers even decades later. To this day, the Zodiac killer remains an enigma. The cryptic ciphers he left behind have never been fully solved, and his true identity remains a mystery. Some believe that advancements in DNA technology will one day unmask him, while others think he may have died long ago, taking his secrets to the grave. The Zodiac's reign of terror may be over, but his legacy continues to captivate and terrify. For now, the Zodiac remains what he always wanted to be, a ghost in the night, a nameless figure who continues to haunt the world from the shadows. As the letters from the Zodiac continued, a pattern emerged. A pattern not in the killings, but in the killer's need for attention. The Zodiac didn't just want to kill, he wanted the world to watch. His letters to the newspapers grew increasingly bold, each more taunting than the last, filled with cryptic puzzles and unsettling boasts. One letter contained a terrifying claim: "I have killed 37 people." Investigators scrambled to verify this, but no concrete evidence ever emerged to support the figure. Whether this was another part of his mind game or the truth, it was clear that the Zodiac thrived on manipulation. He once wrote, "I look like the description passed out only when I do my thing. The rest of the time I look entirely different." The unsettling nature of these letters only deepened the public's fear. The killer could be anyone, anywhere: your neighbor, your co-worker, the man standing next to you on the bus. He could be hiding in plain sight, and that fear was exactly what the Zodiac craved. Despite the fear he spread, the Zodiac's ciphers remained an unsolved piece of the puzzle. Cryptographers, both professional and amateur, pored over his messages for decades, desperate to unlock the key to the Zodiac's identity. The most infamous of these was the 340-character cipher sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in November 1969. For years, it went unsolved, taunting both investigators and the public. The cryptograms were more than just letters. They were an obsession. Newspapers received thousands of responses from amateur sleuths claiming to have cracked the code. Some were convinced that they had found the Zodiac's real name hidden in the symbols, while others believed that the ciphers held clues to future murders. The mystery was gripping, and the Zodiac knew this. He reveled in the attention, knowing that every unsolved cipher kept him alive in the public consciousness. But as the years went by, the cipher remained a haunting enigma. The Zodiac's letters stopped in the mid-1970s, but the case didn't go cold. Law enforcement remained obsessed with finding the killer. Detectives who had been assigned to the case spoke of sleepless nights, haunted by the idea that this monster was still out there, somewhere, laughing at them. The psychological toll on those investigating the case was immense. Many of the original detectives retired without ever finding closure, the unanswered questions hanging over them like a shadow. One of the most famous detectives to work the Zodiac case was Dave Toschi, a San Francisco inspector who became synonymous with the investigation. Known for his eccentric personality and his relentless work ethic, Toschi was deeply involved in the hunt for the Zodiac. Over time, he became something of a public figure himself, often the face of the police force's efforts in media reports. Toschi's obsession with the Zodiac killer was well documented, and he would later admit that not solving the case was one of the greatest disappointments of his career. Toschi wasn't the only one who became fixated on the Zodiac. In fact, the case inspired an entire generation of amateur detectives, all determined to uncover the identity of the mysterious killer. The case attracted attention from far and wide, with individuals creating entire careers around the investigation. Some focused on cracking the cryptograms, while others meticulously reviewed the case files, hoping to find the one overlooked clue that could break the case wide open. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, and in the late 2000s, David Fincher's film Zodiac reignited public interest in the case. The movie, based on the work of Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle who became obsessed with the case, painted a chilling picture of the Zodiac and the investigators who pursued him. The film didn't solve the case, but it brought the story to a new generation of true crime enthusiasts, ensuring that the Zodiac's reign of terror would never be forgotten. Despite the growing interest in the case, no one seemed able to solve the mystery. But that changed in December 2020, when a team of codebreakers from the US, Australia, and Belgium finally cracked the infamous 340-character cipher. After more than 50 years, the message was decoded, but it offered no concrete clues to the Zodiac's identity. Instead, it was a chilling message from the killer. "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." The codebreaker's success reignited hope that the case could be solved. If the ciphers could be cracked, perhaps DNA evidence could finally provide the identity that had eluded investigators for so long. Advances in forensic technology, including the use of genealogical databases, had led to the capture of the Golden State Killer in 2018, another notorious criminal who had evaded justice for decades. Could the Zodiac be next? Investigators turned their attention to the possibility of solving the case through DNA. The Zodiac had sent numerous letters to the newspapers, and it was possible that traces of his DNA could still be found on the stamps or envelopes. Forensic scientists scoured the old evidence, hoping to find something that had been missed. In the early 2000s, partial DNA profiles were extracted from some of the Zodiac's correspondence, but they were not enough to definitively identify the killer. The hope now is that with advances in DNA technology and the rise of genetic genealogy, a breakthrough could be on the horizon. Just as the Golden State Killer was identified through a combination of DNA and genealogical databases, there is a chance that the Zodiac could be unmasked in the same way. But for now, that remains a tantalizing possibility, one that keeps both investigators and the public waiting for the final answer to one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Over the years, dozens of suspects have emerged, but none have been definitively linked to the crimes. Arthur Lee Allen remains one of the most famous, largely due to the circumstantial evidence that seemed to connect him to the murders. Allen was a convicted child molester who had been living in Vallejo at the time of the Zodiac's first killings. His name came up repeatedly in the investigation, and those who knew him reported strange behavior that matched some of the Zodiac's quirks. But despite years of investigation, no conclusive evidence ever linked Allen to the Zodiac killings. Allen died in 1992, taking any secrets he may have had to the grave. Other suspects have come and gone over the years. In 2002, DNA tests on one of the Zodiac letters ruled out Allen and other prominent suspects. But this only deepened the mystery. If Allen wasn't the Zodiac, who was? Was the killer someone no one suspected? Someone who had flown completely under the radar? Or was the Zodiac multiple people, as some conspiracy theories have suggested? There are also those who believe that the Zodiac may have been a police officer or someone with ties to law enforcement. This theory stems from the killer's apparent knowledge of police procedures and his ability to evade capture so successfully. Some even speculate that the Zodiac may have been involved in the investigation itself, feeding misinformation to throw the police off his trail. These theories, though intriguing, remain speculative. The cultural impact of the Zodiac Killer is undeniable. His cryptic messages, his eerie costume at Lake Berryessa, his ability to evade capture, all of these elements have made him a lasting figure in popular culture. He has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and films, each one adding to the mythos of the man who seemed to embody the very concept of the unknown. The Zodiac was more than a killer. He was a figure who exploited humanity's deepest fears: fear of the dark, fear of the unknown, fear of death. Even now, more than 50 years after his first known killing, the Zodiac Killer continues to fascinate. His story has become a part of American folklore, a real-life bogeyman whose face we've never seen, whose name we've never heard. But perhaps the most terrifying thing about the Zodiac is that he could still be out there, watching, waiting, enjoying the fact that, even in death, he remains an unsolved mystery. The Zodiac Killer wanted to be remembered, and he got his wish. But in the end, will he also get the one thing he feared the most: exposure? Or will the Zodiac remain as he has for decades, a ghost in the night, an enigma that continues to haunt us all?